Hello, good evening. Welcome to this month's webinar on Staycation property investment. Your questions answered with myself, Michael Holliday, and my colleague Paul.
Yeah, hello. Got us back again.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Either cheap or we know what we're talking about. We're not sure which one.
The latter. So slightly different this webinar. What we've done, I mean, staycation is a real buzzword at the moment. A lot of people are talking about it, whether that's short-term lets, service accommodation, or furnished holiday lets, and investing in that sector. So what we did was, we wrote out to a lot of people and asked them to get in touch with any questions basically that they need answered on it, typical questions that come up. We also spoke to our sales consultants and found out off them of what things come up from clients, investors that they want answered. So hence why we're here, and we're hopefully going to answer a lot of those questions. Thankfully as well, there's not just going to be me and Paul answering those. We have Raj Patel, MD of My Property Host, who are another short-term let company. So Raj, good to have you here.
Thanks, Mike. Lovely to be here.
Okay, so and we have Jonathan as well from AccountsPro, who will help answer questions around the taxation side of investing in this particular sector, which is a big area, isn't it? Indeed. So Jonathan as well, welcome you on board.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And obviously with Jonathan, as we've seen in the rehearsals, we will hear you, but may not always see you.
Yeah, we'll try with the signal, but we'll come to that. So a bit of an overview of what we plan to cover. As I say, there's a lot of Q&As to start off with. Me and Paul will answer, and Raj and Jonathan will step in now and again. We also have a client testimonial, a client who's bought several properties off us, just to get a bit of an insight as to why she wanted to purchase property here in her partner.
We're well aware that we are ultimately selling properties off this, so it was just nice to find out from someone who's hopefully in a similar situation to the people listening to this.
Exactly, along with our guest speakers as mentioned. So for those of you, just if it's your first webinar with us, we like to try and keep it as interactive as possible. So feel free to ask as many questions as you want during the webinar. You'll notice on the right hand side of your screen, there's a section there where it says chat. Just put any questions in there or any comments. Keep it as clean as possible, and we'll look to answer them. Obviously, it is a bit of a Q&A session, so there may be some that we're going to answer anyway, and we're not being rude. We're just
we'll probably leave them a little bit to the end just to make sure that or we'll let you know if we're going to be answering those questions within the webinar itself.
And there'll be a lot of links, a lot of brochures where you can download stuff afterwards. The slides you'll get as well. So let's get going. I think, So some of you won't know us as Residential Estates. So we thought we'd give a brief overview of who we are as a company. We started about 30 years ago now.
Something like that.
As a typical high street agent in Chester, where we're based. So we did predominantly sales and lettings property. The big move for us was about 12 years ago when the managing director, Steve, started the short-term let side of the business, or serviced accommodation, some of you may know. Furnished holiday lets is the other term for it as well. And we were before the likes of Airbnb. We were certainly Chester's leading short-term let provider. So it's a big move for us. And obviously now since COVID and people talking about staycations and all that type of thing, it's taken off, and we're in a fortunate position.
Well, that's it. And we'll come on to the term staycation boom, but it just shows it's been going for a long time, this option of letting out your property.
Absolutely. And then obviously we have the investment department, which me and Paul are in, which started about 7 years ago. So we sell predominantly off-plan properties and some existing as well. And what we'll often do is combine it. So not only do we sell investment property, but we look to manage the properties ourselves, whether that be through us or partners such as Raj joined us this evening at My Property Host and other providers.
The fact we've had all this experience in different areas of the market means that we can offer that facility to everyone that buys. We sort of have walked it and taught it in all areas of what you need to manage a property that you buy. And
it helps us to bring on properties, and if me and your jobs on that, because we know the end game on it. So we have that. So we try and cover the full cycle, don't we? Bring on properties, manage properties, and we have a resale side of the business as well. So, but yeah, we have our website. You're welcome to go and visit and take a bit more look on us as well. So that's a little bit about us.
Just to let Stan know, I've made a note to your question. We'll come back to later, Stan, if that's okay.
Nice and keen, Stan. I like it. Straight in there. So we'll start off with exactly what is a short-term let property, Paul.
It's not a long-term let. Basically, if you start with the term long-term let or AST, assured short hold tenancy, that's the standard 6 to 12 month tenancy. A short-term let is the same property, but it allows you to let it on a more flexible basis, so anything under 6 months, which can be from 2 nights to 1 week. The difference is one's paid on a monthly rate and the other one's paid on a nightly or weekly rate.
Yeah.
So, it caters for a tourist who's just in a city for a couple of days, or someone who's going away for a week, or a contractor who's working away for a couple of months. It just allows that little bit of flexibility.
Yeah, in its simplistic form, it's a property let out on a nightly basis, isn't it? There are different types, which will come to the likes of corporate lets, furnished holiday lets, but all under this bracket of short-term let property as well. So I mentioned that on corporate lets and holiday lets, and what's the difference between the two? Holiday lets is pretty obvious. It's a leisure booking, something we've not been able to do for the last 12, 18 months.
I'm pretty sure most people on here will have been away or stayed in a cottage or gone to a touristic area, Lakes, Cornwall, Wales, Norfolk, wherever it may be, and stopped somewhere. That is what we would consider holiday let.
Yeah, and certainly an area that's taken off, and that's partly why is the staycation boom, isn't it? People not comfortable travelling abroad, or there's restrictions in place, so they're looking in the UK to travel, and that's where holiday lets really take off. Like you mentioned, the areas like Cornwall, the Lake Districts. Whereas corporate lets, your businesses that are staying.
So that's people who are working away, secondments, relocators, insurance sort of facilities, chain breakers, people who need something within generally a city that we find, or a secondary or third town, or third city, should I say, third town. And these can incorporate anything from business, and then you do get the odd place where it is touristic and city as well.
Yeah, and it's cheaper for companies as well to have these sort of properties and put their staff up in there, rather than put them in a hotel and have to pay for the food out and everything like that. They can be in these service departments, self-contained apartments, cook their own food. You had the experience of that, didn't you, when you one of your many previous jobs?
I think it's important to mention that, because ultimately we'll go on to the returns and how it works and the options you have, but from the company's side who put up, it is beneficial for them as well. It gives you happier employees. It gives them somewhere where they can call a home, somewhere where the family can come up, etc. It is beneficial for all parties, and that's why everyone's got so on board with it. Yeah,
and it's the corporate side why the market's still been strong, even during COVID. We've got a case study, haven't we, later on, which will show you the figures. Incredibly, it's actually done better during COVID, and it's because of this corporate let side.
Not that we want another COVID.
No, we don't. Definitely don't. But it just shows you it can still perform with it, but we'll come to that after. Whereas the holiday let side, everyone knows about. It's a bit more obvious to people on it. But yeah, they come under the same umbrella, don't they? The two sides under the short-term let, flexible let. Yeah, absolutely. Longevity of the market. Well, I think it's worth pointing out to start off with, this isn't something new. It may be new to some people, staycation property, but it's been around a long time. We mentioned that we've been in the industry for 12 years doing it. I can remember doing property shows 4 years ago in London, and we were the only stand, weren't we, really talking about service accommodation. And people were coming to us, and we spent the first 5 minutes explaining what it was. Whereas now we're in a fortunate position, people have heard of it, seen it on the news, they're coming to us and asking.
There's been a need for it for a long time. So, I mean, the answer to the question is it's a market that's got an endless longevity as far as we can see, because ultimately there's going to be a limited supply of the properties that allow you to run it on this way. It's not everything you can do it on, but it has always been there, and I think from our point of view, it's something we see as something that's going to grow and grow and grow. I mean, maybe it's a good time just to bring Raj and ask his thoughts, because obviously I think you're going to mention the growth of your company, Raj, but I mean, obviously it's something with you investing in it that you see a large growth in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the key is the growth in the number of guests as well as properties. The number of people that are using this as a means of travel has really exploded. I mean, short-term rentals, as you say, have been around for a long time. Saw someone mention sites, cottages on the questions. They've been around for ages. What's relatively new is the urban market, and that's the advent of Airbnb and Booking.com, Expedia displaying these properties, and more so, people are wanting to stay in short-term rentals rather than hotel rooms for exactly the reasons that Mike's already said. Access to a kitchen, living room, it's just a whole lot more comfortable and a very similar, if not cheaper, price point.
Yeah, and that's why, you know, we certainly do think it's here to stay, don't we? It's been here a long time, and it's certainly it's only going to get stronger. COVID has actually helped this market in a way, hasn't it? It's opened people's eyes to it from the leisure and the corporate side. So, So who used them? We've briefly sort of mentioned this, haven't we, on it? Certainly the corporate side, the companies, it's much cheaper for them, as mentioned on it. You know, I touched on it when we went to a property show in London. We've always stayed in serviced accommodation, haven't we, there?
It's a flexibility of it as well. So, I mean, if, so let's say someone's working in Chester for 2 months and they live in London and their contract ends after a month, they can leave out with a hotel, get paid.
Yeah.
You know, with the flexibility of this gives them more control over what they do. Or if you're in a hotel and you need to book for another night, that room can be booked, so then you're changing. Whereas we can always look after it with this side. Yeah,
and flexibility on the leisure side as well, isn't it? You know, a lot of these properties have key safes where people can check in whenever they want. They're not tied down to particular times. They don't have to interact with people. They don't have the communal areas where, you know, people are still a little bit nervous on the COVID side, so they don't have to do that on it, and that's why it's popular and it's going to continue that way.
I mean, ultimately, if you've got 2 price points and let's say they're the same price, a hotel that's a room with a bed, or a 1-bedroom apartment, for example, personally, I'd always choose the apartment.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I think this is one of the main questions that we get asked, the differences in returns between an AST, which is a 6-12 month tenancy, and a short-term let. In short, and we'll be going on to some case studies later, which will give you a fair example of how they work. Once a property is up and running and has been marketed and has got a steady flow coming in, then generally you find that the property, the yields that you get, the returns that you get will be double on a short-term let. That is generally the average. So you've got flat A and it's next door to flat B. Flat A is run on an AST. Flat B is run on a short-term let. They're both the same properties. They're both going to go in value the same, but one is just giving you double the yield.
And that's why in certain areas it's good to have that mixture of both, isn't it? You know, your city centre ones, the likes of Chester, York, those sort of places. It's important to see what it would be on a normal AST as well as on short-term let, because you can flick between the two. That's the beauty of this type of investment. Whereas on the proper FHL side, the furnished holiday let side, the likes of the Lake District, Cornwall, and thinking of Anglesey, them types of places, they're not going to go anywhere. They're not going to change. So you don't need to see what an AST would be on it.
And this is the whole point of this. It's the understanding of the market, because if there'll be plenty of investors on here who are quite happy with 6-12 month tenancies, they're secure, which is fantastic. I get it. But down the line, if someone had said to you that you could have doubled your returns, would you take it? I think the answer is probably yes. So all we're trying to explain to people is that option is there. We're not saying it's right or wrong, but that option is there to be able to
we gave people a choice, didn't we, when COVID happened to our landlords, because no one knew what was going to happen. We said, look, do you want to switch over to a normal AST and take a 6-12 month tenancy, or do you want to stick with the short-term let side and keep on the revenue share and see what comes in? And what was the split? Probably
it's about 70-30. I mean, I was working in that department at the time, and, you know, and quite understandably, people had mortgages to pay, you know, for the properties they had, and we could see that bookings were dropping off, or, you know, jobs were being cancelled. So it's like, right, okay, well, we can take you out of the contract, the agreement that you've got. You've got a fully furnished property. It's in a good location, because that's got to be the 2 basics of what you buy. And they rented out straight away.
Yeah, and we just weren't sure what was going to happen.
No, we had no idea.
We didn't know what was the right route in it. We knew we could let it as a normal AST,
and we were worried, like everybody else, on the 30 that we're deciding to stick with short-term lets. But as you'll see later on the figures, it worked out quite well, because we found a new market with it all.
Exactly, and the ones who stick with it actually did better, didn't they? Really, who went to the short-term let side. So it's proven. It's kind of COVID proof, hasn't it? On that thing. We just got a question that's coming from Hitesh.
Again, this is something we'll cover. It's one of our questions, Hitesh, so just bear with us, please.
Yeah, and good to hear from you, Hitesh. But we will come on to that in a minute or two. So what if you try the short-term option and it does not work? Well, we've just mentioned it then on that. You can flick between the two, and that's the beauty of it.
I mean, just to be clear, with a holiday let, it's slightly less of an option. That option is there, but when you're in a touristic resort, it is going to be pretty much tourism. But that tourism has been there for that's been decades and decades of years, you know, so it's not going anywhere, that.
And the switch on the holiday side is more so, you know, you letting people stay there and yourself, you switch between the two, so you can use your holiday let yourself, you know, if things were quiet, if you're in a COVID period, or your other people can stay there on it. So it's the real flexibility of it.
There's also occasionally a tax reason where, let's say you've got other properties that are not furnished holiday let, and you've got property profits from other properties that are within your portfolio, and you will offset losses, let's say, of an FHL against one or the other. Sometimes you let an FHL become a short-term let, an AST, to enable for you to mix the property profits and losses together. But that's just a side point, just related to what you were saying.
No, perfect.
No, it's a good point, Jonathan. And Philip's just came on there asking about the tax benefits, and we will. Sorry to keep saying this, but
we'll get that later.
We'll
we've got a section for this, Dilip, at the end where Jonathan will run through exactly how all that works.
Yeah. So that is coming up.
So I like the fact when I buy a standard buy to let the property increase in value and my yields get higher. So basically, historically, how people have invested and reinvested is they buy a property, it grows in value. The yields generally are designed to pay off the outgoings and give you a small residual income. They grow in time as well as rents grow, and your property price remains the same. And then you release money to buy another property. And guess what? You do exactly the same on this.
Yeah.
It's the same property. And rents increase as time goes on.
It's just a different way of letting it out, isn't it?
It's just a different way of letting it out. It's not, when we talk about short-term lets, it's not a different type of property. It is the same property. It just offers you a different management option.
And it's worth pointing out as well, a lot of you might think when you get offered a property, like a short-term let one, you think, well, I may go for a slightly cheaper option or something else you find and just do it myself on short-term lets. What you'll find is with a lot of developments is the leases don't allow short-term lets. No. It's so common. We've seen it so many times. When the likes of ourselves bring on properties and we've got invested interest, we make sure it's written in the lease that short-term let's allowed and the planning allows it. We've seen it so many times.
And there's other things where people think, well, I maybe don't want to do it as well, or it sounds more difficult, etc. But again, we'll cover that later. The world is a different place now. There's companies out there like Raj who are just set out to do things like this, and ourselves, you know, and sites, as they mentioned. But so it's relatively simple. It's just about options. I always find I've always tried to think of something that compares to having two options where one is better than the other, but you can go back to A if you don't like B, and I can never quite think of something that's a similar option.
Move to the next webinar.
Yeah.
So do we have examples? And we do. We've brought with us some case studies. It's all well and good, me and Paul talking away about it, but we thought we'd give you real life examples of properties that we've managed in the past and how they've performed on a short-term let basis. So the first one, City Suites. This, to give you an overview, this was a development we sold about 4 years ago,
something like that,
to our investors. Development in Chester, where we're based. Good location, right near the train station.
And it helped having a relationship with the developer because we needed short-term lets in Chester. Yeah. We had a demand for it, and we spoke to a developer who purchased a block and allowed it to happen.
Absolutely. And you can see an example here. So on a normal AST, so a 6 to 12 month tenancy, this property would bring in about £800 per month on a two-bed property, this is. Whereas on through the short-term lets, letting out that way, it's brought in £1,200 per calendar month on it as well. So you can sort of see an 8.3% net yield as opposed to a 4.5%. So
and one of this was only marketed for 6 months, so this is relatively new within it when we did these figures. And what we'll see on the next one is something that's been marketed for longer, how rents increase.
Yeah, it's a good example on this one, isn't it? And it's done even better, I suppose. This is Sudbury Way, which for those of you that don't know Chester, this is towards the racecourse. So probably more of a leisure booking, this one, even though it will get some corporate bookings on it as well. But really great returns, £1,500 average per calendar month. Some real high spikes you can see there, you know, as high as £3,000 gross in certain months. So real high nightly rates.
Yeah, it's one of the ones where we originally started on the racecourse, and you know, they are popular. But the good thing is the properties were bought at a certain price because they've increased, and that's hence it shows you how rents do increase. You know what I mean? When you're looking at 14%, well, 13.5% returns, anyone will bat your hand off for that.
They would, but and even on an AST though, 6.5% is not bad. We've probably become a little bit greedy, haven't we, on this side?
But that's also because rents have increased for the property price they bought as well. Yeah. You know, so if they bought this property now, it's not going to be £140,000.
Yeah. which goes back to that point, doesn't it?
I'll let you talk about this one, Michael.
Yeah, so for full transparency, this is actually my property that I let out on a short-term let basis that the company manages. So similar sort of location down near the racecourse. It gets the leisure and corporate bookings. The reason why I wanted to show this one is these are the months during COVID. So where a lot of people would have thought, well, during COVID, a short-term let's never going to perform. It actually performed better during COVID than before then because we had the corporate bookings, the corporate lets on it. And if we look at their sort of average monthly income, and that's net, is £1,200. So I'm getting about a 10.5% net yield on that, as opposed to 5.5% on an AST with it. So yeah, performing well. It shows it's COVID proof.
Yeah,
certainly on the corporate lets like this, which I'm obviously really pleased with as well. So Raj, is this, just to bring you in, is this typical with yourself as well?
Yes, absolutely. It takes a while for properties to bed in. Once they do, they fly. And as for the COVID period, the durability of short-term rentals. I mean, it's a home, right? It's not a hotel. It's the durability that made them so resilient during COVID. We had 72% occupancy over 2020. I mean, the rates were down, but we still managed 72% occupancy because people need homes,
And people looking to work from home, Raj, as well, aren't they? It's sort of opened it up to people that, and certainly for companies that, we don't need to have necessarily staff in the offices. They can work from home. And if you're going to work from home, well, we may as well work from home somewhere nice, in the likes of the lakes or somewhere like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's that, but you also, when people are traveling for business, they don't. If you're going to be spending more time on Zooms, etc., on your laptop, you don't want to do it in a 10 by 10 hotel room. You want to do it somewhere where you've got a dining table. Maybe you can have your laptop there. You have a bit more space,
Yeah, 100%.
No, absolutely. So yeah, there's some examples. We've got more, and feel free to speak with our consultants afterwards, and they'll be able to show you on that.
Just a quick one for Patrick. We can put you in touch with mortgage brokers. Now, generally, the loan to value, it can go from 25% up to 35%, depends on personal circumstances and what type. In terms of interest rates, we are covering that a little bit later. It is only going to brief. We're not mortgage advisors.
Yeah, we're not. I mean, typically, interest rates are a little bit higher on short-term let properties, but we'll come on to, and Jonathan will really cover a good piece on that as to why it's not necessarily a bad thing and what you can offset on it as well. But yeah, you're talking about 70% loan to value, but we have seen some at 75% loan to value, haven't we, on it as well? So there's definitely options out there, Patrick, on it, which we'll come on to as well.
And the same for UKT as well. It's something we'll discuss on what has historically happened and what can happen. It depends on whether you're getting something that's more touristic or whether you're getting something in the city centre. So we will try and cover that as well. Yeah,
and it mixes. I mean, my one was a holiday let mortgage, so mine was a 70% loan to value on it as well. And I'm switching between I can switch between the two on short-term let or AST. So yeah, plenty of options there.
I think this is a good time to bring Raj in. We obviously have a very thorough service we offer, but we don't have a sort of ground force to expand, do we, to places. So over the last few years, we've worked with Raj, who was, he'll tell you himself how many now apartments he's got, etc., that are being run, and how we work with him. And just before we get to Raj, it's worth pointing out as well, I mean, you can let these properties out yourself. I mean, we've had clients in the past that mentioned City Suites, the one in Chester. We had a guy who bought 3 properties himself, and he manages them. He puts it on all the booking portals, and I suppose cuts out that management fee. The only problem with that is there's a lot of work involved. It is his job.
It's his job. Yeah, he's substituted the 9 to 5 work. It wasn't for him anymore, and he loves it. This change, and he's done well on it. So you're not tied in. You don't have to use a management company. Just the same as a normal letter. You don't have to do that. Absolutely. But you can use a management company, and obviously we've got experience, and the likes of Raj has a lot of experience. So we started working with you, Raj, probably about 3 or 4 years ago now, something like that, didn't we? Where certain developments that maybe we couldn't quite reach at the time, we would link up with Raj, so Raj would manage it on the ground. We still work with him, so we still use all the booking portals and help generate bookings for our investors out there. But rather than me blabbering on, Raj, I'll let you introduce yourself to the guys.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thanks. It's been an absolute delight working with you guys, because you absolutely know the short-term rentals model and the benefit there. I know what you've said about the long-term rental market being a good option. I'll come on to that in a second. But a little introduction about myself. I was a lawyer for my sins for most of my career. I was a partner at a very large law firm, a top 100 UK law firm. And I came into short-term rentals in 2014. That's not when I made the switch. I founded My Property Host in 2014, actually to manage my own property. At that time, there weren't very many professional managers in the market. It was the start of the urban short-term rentals market, and Airbnb was really starting to get prominent at that time, and that was driving the growth. So I found someone to manage my property in the way that I wanted it to be managed. I thought I thought it was crazy that I was handing over my only asset, my only real asset, to people that I didn't know, that were coming in, every 2 days, 3 days. And so the infrastructure there was really important to me. The risk and responsibility versus the income reward. I mean, the income reward was absolutely. I mean, I was flabbergasted. That's when I realized that I had to set up a proper business around it. 20%, give or take, return on cash, and that was in London, where yields are 4%, 3-4%. If we're lucky, yeah. I know that's not return on cash, but you can extrapolate that for return on cash. This was 20%, and I thought, wow, this is something quite different. But because of the lack of professional management at the time, I thought, right, this is the time for someone to put their stamp on it and take what I learned in a law firm, and put that stamp into the short-term rentals business, into the industry, and that's what we've done. So today, forgive me, I'm going to rattle these off as a list. Today we're operational in London, Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds, York, Derby, Preston, Bolton, Ipswich, New Brighton, Bradford, Sheffield, and we have Sheffield, Colwyn Bay, Liverpool, Southport, Bournemouth, Southampton, and Caerphilly coming up in very short order over the next 9 to 12 months. So that's major growth. I mean, we started as I mentioned in London, and from 2014 to 18 it was largely a hobby business, looking after mine and my friends' properties. In 2019, that's when end of 2018, beginning of 2019, that's when I saw that the kind of the big VC funded players in this area were not doing such a great job actually looking after guests, and that's what we'd done so well. So we devised our strategy at that time and realized that in order to offer a really good guest experience, what we needed was to have all of our units in the same building. That was key to us. It was front and center, having all of our units. Sorry, I'm being very unemotional about this. All of our apartments, our wonderful apartments, in one building. Because then we can really invest in the infrastructure. So our setup today is working with Mike, Paul, and their team, and other sales agents. What we do is that we work on selected developments, only the ones that really fit our mold in terms of location, quality of the development, which is obviously very key. And we take a number of units in those developments, and we can have a site manager. That for us is absolutely key. I'm slightly old-fashioned. A lot of new entrants into this market like keyless entry. They like automation. I know what you said earlier, Mike, about that being cleaner, and we can do that. But we just don't. We prefer. It's me. I prefer old-fashioned. I believe that hospitality is between people. I believe that it's the meeting of people that makes the experience special. And it's also great from a security perspective, because that's when we physically check the government issued ID of the guest that's made the booking, which for me, as I said, coming at it from an owner, as one of the owners of properties in the business, it is also key.
And you mentioned some of the locations there, Raj, that you mentioned before might surprise a few people, the likes of Bradford, Bolton,
Colwyn Bay.
Yeah, not necessarily the ones that would jump out like your major cities. You've really made that work, haven't you? Certainly from what I've seen in cases in yourself. What's the sort of reason behind that, would you say?
Because when you're marketing a building, yes, there's two things. Number one is that you're open to additional channels. So your typical channels take properties from any kind of from anybody, Airbnb being the prime example. However, there's certain listing platforms that only work with professional managers that have a number of units in a given building, and that's because they know that there will be a professionalism about that too. So it increases the viewing, the marketing of the property, and from a guest perspective, it gives guests comfort when they can see that somebody has a number of units in the same building.
And this ties in with, we've got a question from Nick here, and it's what are the advantages of new build properties for short-term lets rather than renovated older properties, which is something we cover, and it's about the branding, etc., who you can rent it out to. And on the renovated older properties, I always sort of think that very much it's a good thing to do if you're doing the managing for it, and it is sort of a hobby for you as such, or you're looking to do it over, if you've got something that's local to you. But this is what you're explaining now, why we do, we're answering the question about leasehold properties and new properties.
And a lot of people staying in these properties like the shiny new, nothing to go wrong. That's another thing that comes up. Reviews are a big thing as well, aren't they, Raj? Making sure your reviews are really good.
And when you're a businessman away, you want to be close to having to eat, drink, social, don't you? You want to be in the city centre, and that's obviously where you're going to get generally your apartments.
And Minesh has asked the question as well, in your experience, what are the better yields, holiday or urban? It really depends, doesn't it? I mean, there's certain areas, like we've mentioned, that Raj has covered, the likes of Bolton and places like that, which you maybe wouldn't think would be perfect for it. But all it sort of means is the nightly rates are lower than areas like Manchester, but so is the purchase price as well. So your yields are relative to that, and still coming out of this 10-11%.
It's something we've talked about a lot. It's all, they're all linked, property price versus what you get. I mean, with a holiday let in high season, you can get extremely high rates, and that will then even out the rest of it because it's going to be more seasonal. And then you've got your bigger cities where your nightly rate could actually be roughly the same as somewhere smaller, but your property price is half the price, so yields are going to be higher. So it really depends on what you want out of a property. And without sounding too, as Raj said, about unemotional, you need to be unemotional about it if it's an investment. If it's a holiday let and you're buying it with a view to, I want to use it and I want some residual income, I want it to pay for itself, then obviously you want to be personal about it. But sometimes with investments, the lower the property with a higher nightly rate actually makes the better investment.
Yeah, no, definitely. Hopefully I think that's from Bolton on it this evening.
Well, I think that's a great example, Bolton, because we're now getting bookings. Okay, this is admittedly because of an Ironman taking place. It's £150 a night for a weekend in Bolton in July this year.
Yeah,
I mean that's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely, and
it's exciting as well, Raj. I would say it's certainly why I got into it myself. Is as opposed to the normal AST, it's exciting to see spikes in bookings, and there's maybe an event that's going on, like you mentioned, where it jumps up.
And there is a roof on what people will pay for a night, unless you're going ultra high end. I always remember that we got offered a development in Reading, I think it was, where 2 beds were about 400 odd K, something like that, which is a lot of money. But the nightly rate was around about, I think you might have done the forecasting for this one, Raj. I think the nightly rate was around about £125, £130. And yet there was properties in Leeds, Preston, where you can roughly get the same sort of rate, but half the purchase price.
Yeah, that's quite right. I'd say generally the further south you get, the lower the return. So in London, generally in London, you're not looking at the times 2 mark. You're looking at closer to 150% of what you'd make on a normal rental.
And I think when you do go down south, then you do start looking for those sort of those tertiary cities, those secondary cities, don't you, like the Southamptons of this world, which might not strike out as, and I mentioned Southampton because we have got something there, it might not strike out as somewhere that appeals, but it's got a large commuter market,
Yeah, absolutely. And they're my favourite because they're the surprise ones.
Yeah.
They're the surprise ones where the property values are are lower, and yet there is a cap. There's a bottom cap on nightly rates. And that's why out of our portfolio, I think if you're looking at compared to our initial forecast, so the way that we work, as you know, is we give a forecast for the development, and then we track how we perform against that forecast, and obviously that's very important to us. And Bolton has been tracking much closer than other places, largely because of the floor and nightly rate.
I think there's always an assumption, which I totally understand, is that the more you pay for a property, the more you're going to get per night, but it doesn't really work that way.
Yeah. I'd say it's probably the opposite.
Yeah.
Anything else, Raj, that you want to cover? Obviously, we've got more questions where we'll bring you in now and again, but anything else you want to mention?
Yeah, just in terms of, I mean, you touched on the growth in the market. I think it's important just to talk about that. We've grown 10x in terms of the number of units that we've managed since 2018. We're now at 4,500 rooms across the UK. That's across both of our affordable and our 4-star range. But it just shows you the appetite of people willing, property owners doing this, but also guests that are happy to stay in alternative accommodation.
Yeah, 100%.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Raj, for that bit. Like I said, please stay on. We've got more questions for you. We want you to jump in on.
Absolutely.
So, back to
this could be one of them.
Yeah, straight back in.
Not management charges.
Yeah, and the short answer is yes, they are higher than your standard buy-to-lets. I mean, typically on an AST, you're talking 8-10%
plus
normally management fee with it. Whereas on a short-term let, you're more looking at the 19%, 20%. We're around that figure, aren't we? I know Raj is pretty similar as well.
So put it in context of what you do for that service as well. And there's a couple of important parts when you go through a letting agent. And again, it's important to mention that you can do it yourself as well, where you don't have a management charge. On a standard tenancy, they do a vetting. They find a tenant who comes to you, who comes to the letting agent as well. They don't source them. They come to you. They find a tenant, they put them in, and that's it. Then they take a proportion of your rent every month. And there's probably not much.
Yeah, and there's nothing much you need to sort of manage on a normal AST. I know people will say they'll check it every quarter and stuff like that property, but it doesn't. It doesn't really happen.
Tenuous.
Yeah, short-term lets, there's cleans that go in there on it, and we find people. It's not always a case of we put it on portals, which we do, and we get the ones that come in that way. But we go out to like corporate companies. So if there's workers working on a particular construction site, we'll go and speak to them. Like Raj said before, keep it personal. Get in touch with them. Do they need any accommodation to stay in?
But there's also
bookings that way,
one big common denominator, which is really important. And in how all this world works, and we're the same, Raj is the same, Sykes is the same, is that we are incentivized to get you clients, because you only pay a management fee if you have a booking.
Yeah, it's a revenue share model, so it's in our interest to get you the highest rate possible and at the highest occupancy, because we will make more money ultimately, and you will as well. We say it all the time, don't we, Paul? We are effectively your business partner. That's how we see it. We'll sit down with you, won't we, after each year, go for it.
It gives us. There's no reason for us to. If we as a company, as a throwaway figure, earn 10 grand, then you're going to be earning 50 grand.
Yeah.
So that's how it works, and that's what our ambition is to do. The more that we make, the more you make. But why is it 18, 19, 20%? It's because the amount of work goes into it is incredible, from the listings, from the vettings, from the deposits, from dealing with cleans. It's staggering. When I worked in there, we were getting calls at 11:15 at night, and there's someone there 24/7. I didn't answer them, obviously.
That's why you didn't last long.
Yeah. But you do. It is a staggering amount of work. They're going through to portals, dealing with the bookings, dealing with the volume of bookings, and trying to put them into the relevant places. It's an amazing. I mean, you got anything to say on that, Raj?
Yeah, statistically, the response rate needs to be within an hour of an inquiry. And to give you an idea, a guest will write to 3 potential hosts before booking property, and the fastest to respond will typically get the booking. We've got, our coverage is from 7 in the morning until 11 p.m.
Yeah. And it's the same with everything, isn't it? So with a standard letting, you might get at the end of the day, you might get 10 inquiries for one property. The letting agent doesn't care which one goes in.
No.
They've got enough people, that's it. And it's like when we actually sell developments, we commit to selling the development, so instead of someone walking in and just taking it, because if you go into an estate agent, they're going to give you this option, that option, that option. We will commit to doing something. So it's the same with the short-term let side.
Absolutely, and it moves on to variable costs. And as you mentioned, Paul, I mean, there are a lot of variable costs.
Love a variable cost.
Strange love. But you're only going to be paying variable costs if you're getting bookings in, aren't you?
And that's the thing, that the term variable is really sort of quite misleading.
Well, if your variable costs are going up, it's a good sign. You're making good money. There's big bookings coming in because they include like your management fees, your cleaning fees, linen, all of that. Your booking. But
the variable costs only exist if you get a booking.
Absolutely,
and they are actually fixed. Apart from booking commissions, I'd say, which can go up or down depending on direct or who it comes from. They're all fixed. The only reason it's termed variable is because we don't know how many bookings you're going to get a year, so we can't give you a cost of what it's going to be.
Yeah, and we can give examples. You did one of your famous PDFs, didn't you?
Where you, what they were,
where you sort of broke it down of an example of what it would include variable costs. But it's it can put some people off, but it's not something to be afraid of. Like I say, the higher it is, the better you're doing.
It's the term. Roughly, it's 40% of the gross.
It is, yeah.
And
but what should matter to all investors, and what matters to me and other people, is what are your net returns. And if your net returns are high, then there's no problem with it.
If your variable costs are high, your net returns are high.
Yeah, exactly. So who covers costs for damage and repairs? It's quite similar to a hotel. When you book a hotel room, you put down a deposit. This is no different on that. So if they people in there trash the property, it would come out of their deposit. Worth pointing out on this point as well, again, the benefit of a management company, we vet the people staying in there. So it's a minimum 2-night stay. We look out for the likes of stag do's, hen parties, which we don't want in there at all. To try and prevent, we don't want damage and repairs. You don't have to go through it, but there's insurance there.
You'll obviously have landlord's insurance, or you should have landlord's insurance, which will cover you, but there's deposits that are paid. So any minor damage is always taken out of a deposit, which in some ways gives you an element of safety. Again, and I don't want to sound it like we're saying AST is a bad thing. They're not. They're the cornerstone of all investments and foundations, but you could have someone there for 6 months who's causing, and you've got a letting agent that's not going around.
Yeah, you just wouldn't know about it.
You just don't know about it until you go and they move out.
They're actually they're better looked after, aren't they?
Yeah.
People worry about that as well. They think they're going to, they're going to get trashed and that sort of thing. It just isn't the case on it. They're getting clean, after every booking, which can be every couple of days. So they're really well looked after, which helps you resale factor in the future.
Do you have anything to add on that, Raj? Because obviously you will have experienced the odd damage, I would have thought.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we contain, we offer free insurance within our fees, especially short-term rentals insurance, that is. But in terms of that visibility and going in there every few days, our average length of booking in a normal environment is 5 days. So every 5 days, somebody's going into the property and checking, they're cleaning, they're having a look. Any minor damages are being picked up and corrected. So it's unparalleled, I'd say.
Yeah.
We just got a question in from Patrick. I have an 8-bed property near the seafront, all smallish rooms, but ensuite is potentially suitable. Absolutely, I'd say. I'd like to know whereabouts.
I was going to say, what I would do, Patrick, is just grab our details, mine or Mike's or whatever, and we'll get in touch with you and discuss it. That's not a problem.
Yeah.
Brighton, Hove, just get in touch, drop us an email or drop us a number, and we'll have a chat about it rather than just go off topic here, if that's okay.
Good stuff. Paul, you're passionate about this one. I'll let you. Kick this one off.
I think we've covered it. It's because of what customers want. It's what they want, and like I say, for us to source an individual property is almost impossible. That offers an investment, because we are still selling investments at the end of the day. So we have to find something in a good location that fits the criteria, a good specification, and we need multiple units.
Yeah.
And that equals a block of flats.
And the bottom line is normally they're quite central, which, you are going to get leasehold properties. That's the common theme on that, isn't it?
And it's quite weird. I understand the history of freeholds and the numerous bad stories about leasehold, but, I always now see freeholds as potentially more your home Whereas, you know, you're in a rental market now, and you look at city centres, you don't find many houses going up many of the time, do you?
No, and it's not a bad thing, a leasehold probably to have like a block management company behind it as well to look after the block on it, as opposed to you being responsible for that. You
have a sink fund if you have a freehold, if something goes wrong, which you're responsible for. This is just a sinkhole that you pay into.
Yeah.
You know, so.
But the main answer is, that the majority of the are going to be leasehold because they're more central.
You know, and when we do the due diligence, if you look at other things, leasehold equals or ground rents, we try and now we're very, very careful, and we won't even now look at a developer through the history if they're not doing the 0.1% or this sort of thing.
Yeah,
we've been there and seen it. You know,
it's really changed on that front, hasn't it? Yeah. You know, we've all learned a lot on that front.
Well, I mean, from our point of view, it always averages itself out because of the way bookings come in, and obviously we'll get your input on this one, Raj, as well. Yeah. But it's a very common question. Ultimately, and we're also going to find that our client testimony is going to cover this because obviously it's both furnished or lets. You're responsible for your own property as well, so the more you put into it, the more you'll get out of it. And
they'll all get their own listing, won't they?
They'll all get their own listing. You're not up against others. When people go on, even though the brand will be X block of apartments, people will then get to choose what they want based on what's been booked out already, if something's free. And it generally evens out. I'm not saying we have an exact science to it, but it generally evens out.
And it's not saturating the market. So this is why we look for sometimes smaller blocks, don't we? Because we don't want huge blocks where we're going to do them all on short-term lets properly and saturate it that way. We'll either do one or two things. We'll either find a small block, likes of City Suites in Chester, 21 apartments. We can do them on them all, no problem that way. Or we'll have a large block and we'll take several apartments in there or certain floors and make sure in the lease that them ones are allowed and others don't have to be.
You've really got to look at the numbers. The amount of people who want it against the apartments on offer is diminutive, you know, and it just works. And like I say, it's not lazy answer. It works because we know how many we need to fulfill the occupancies that we predict.
And for us, I mean, we want to look after all of our landlords, so we'd be stupid to just put them all in one. You know, we want to spread it across and everyone do well on it.
And plus, it's the difficulty of finding properties that are allowed to do it.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, with, you know, Southampton, Preston, places where we think it's going to be 1-2 developments, isn't it? That's it. You know, and then
it's genuinely the problem is not having enough properties, and I mean that's not a salesy thing. It's true on that. You know, we don't have a problem with trying to fill it. Anything, Raj, you want to add on that point?
Yeah, absolutely. It's it comes down to what I was saying before as well about the guest. You know, when they see, for us, we put MPH, and then we put the listing title, and then they can see that we've got several in that building, and that just automatically gives them extra comfort.
Yeah,
it's automatically more likely to make them book. You can also see, I'm pleased to see that you guys have used some photos from one of our flats there on that page. And that's another key thing. So, you know, things like furniture, this is key. I mean, we've selected this pack as our recommended furniture pack. And that's because it's eye-catching. Everybody's buying these, you know, the guests that are staying in these properties are buying their visit based on photographs. I don't think many people even bother reading the descriptions. It's usually based almost entirely on the photos and the reviews.
Yeah, 100%.
So the power of that is immense, and that's why we have different listings, because you know some flats, you know, you've got the obvious differences: bedrooms, bathrooms, but you've also got in some cases different furniture packs where the owners have decided to get their own, or different views from the window. So every owner has their own.
So if you're in somewhere touristic like the one we've just done in the lakes, I mean, yeah, it might be 3 or 4 grand for a hot tub. That money gets you a lot back.
Definitely.
Little things like that. You know, it's investing in your property. And you've done. I always sort of, when I was dealing with my clients, I was like saying, go up for a couple of days, have a look round and see what you think would make it more appealing to yourself.
Put your own spin on it. Yeah, do quirky stuff. You know, it can be all sorts you put in there. Fruit juices, all sorts, you know, Xbox, PlayStations, just something a bit different where it will stand out and it'll, you know, make your money a lot more that way. So yeah, you'll see furniture packs offered. Certainly when we've sold investment property, we have packs, and by all means, you know, take advantage of them or shop your own. But don't be afraid to put your own spin on it as well. It will go a long way on that front. love to say it was deliberate, Raj, that picture of your furniture collapse, but
definitely,
definitely by chance. So
enough of us for a while.
Yeah, we've got a client, and thanks if she is watching, Sarah, once again, really appreciate who's bought.
And Andy.
Yeah, Sarah and her partner Andy have bought I think 5 or 6 properties from us in this particular sector. And she very kindly offered to do an interview with us last week where we just talked her through, and she talked us through as to why she's invested in this sector, why she's invested with us. Just so you're not hearing from us as salespeople technically, but directly from
She had standard buy-to-lets. And she just wanted to sort of diversify. Yeah.
The full version of this interview, by the way, will be available to everyone to watch, but this is a shortened version of it. So, enjoy. So how have you got into Sarah? Have you got an existing portfolio? Is this something new?
I'd been wanting to rebuild a portfolio, but not finding time to look. So I'd kind of felt that. Actually, a couple of years pre-COVID, I'd felt that the sort of property investment market at that end was topping out a little bit.
Yeah.
And that once the new tax rules for sort of higher rate taxpayers came in, more landlords would step out of it and the market might go down a little bit. But that was all pre-COVID. So of course it's gone up and up and up.
And it sounds like perhaps was that a little bit more hands-on, those types of properties in stock as opposed to maybe the more hands-off models of this?
Yeah. Definitely, and I'd have had to be, I went and viewed maybe 12, 15, but they were going like that. And as I say, I was viewing them and thinking, right, if I get one of these, I'm going to have to do this. I'm going to have to organise painters and decorators, surveyors, new, renovations and all sorts. And I just don't have the time.
And plus, I bought 5 properties through us, like I say, which is great. Couple of student PBSA, but if we keep it relevant, I mean, 3 of them are on these sort of furnished holiday let market, which is a drum we've been banging for a little while. What sort of appeal to you with that? Because obviously it's slightly different to your standard buy-to-lets, isn't it? There's no guarantees of income, etc., all this sort of thing.
We started looking around the Lake District, couldn't really see anything there, so we talked about Wales and looked there, and that's where we came across residential estates. And we liked the way you packaged things up, the way you went about things, and liked very much actually the walkthroughs and so on that you do with properties. And that was really important because, I mean, Andy I'm the sort of person that trusts everybody instinctively. If somebody tells me something, that's it, I trust them. Andy is the opposite side of the coin completely. He's the most cynical person you could ever meet. So actually being able to feel, and I should say now as well, we run an accountancy firm. So we've seen clients doing this for years, but we've also seen people being scammed.
Yeah.
I've been involved with property for quite some time, and we've seen a lot of scams and people lose a lot of money. So we are... I suppose a little bit nervous about jumping into something that feels a bit too good to be true. So it was good to make sure that we're putting actual names to faces and speaking to more than one person at the firm and to other people, and we could find you on LinkedIn or different places and actually knew that there were real people we were speaking to. But in terms of the packaging up, that was something that really appealed that we didn't have to do anything. We could go and have a look around.
Appreciate it.
Everybody was really, really helpful. In terms of the market, I think it's here to stay. Yes, it's a boom market at the moment because of COVID, but people like good properties, and the staycation, I think, will continue for quite some time. The furnished holiday let model, you kind of get in what you put out. I think if you have a nice quality place, you can give good service. There are so many ways of taking it to market nowadays that you're not just stuck going through a Lake District Cottages website or having to phone one person to see what they have in their portfolio. You've got so many ways of bringing your property to market now.
It leads on a little bit to the next question. You've touched briefly on your other properties in the Lakes, but when you looked at such as Eden Grove, was there an element of personal use as well, or was it sort of very much the investment head on? What was the balance on that?
So when we looked at that, I wasn't looking at it at all. Andy was looking at it with purely the investment head on. But of course, we went down to have a little nosy. And the developer on site, you maybe don't want to publish this bit, but the developer on site was really good and let us in to have a look around while they were still building. And it was just beautiful, just such a gorgeous location. And yes, the numbers stacked up. Now, if I'm honest, both Andy and I reworked the numbers given to us by residential estates because you're sales guys, after all. You're trying to sell the property.
Yeah.
But we reckoned, if we look at what we can do with our money in the markets in terms of investments, again, you only want so much in there in terms of keeping it in a bank account or something or other else, where I've had that money sitting in a bank account doing nothing for a number of years. So really, I'm happy if it was making sort of half to a third of what you were suggesting it would make net, because that for me is enough, and it will get some capital growth also, because I don't think we're at the top of the market for that type of property in that area.
Yeah, and we always want clients to do that as well, Sarah, on it, do their own research and have a look. That's how we come to those figures, isn't it, from our software and from other companies that have got bookings that area. So no, you're right to do.
Well, you live and die by the sword as well. I mean, it's like I said, numbers and numbers, aren't they? You can put any numbers you wanted, but at the end of the day, if we start putting numbers out there we don't believe, then guess who's going to get the call in a year's time?
Yeah,
and
that's the long term of our relationship, isn't it? On it, the sales part is only 2 or 3 months. Hopefully, if we manage your property, that's years. So it'd be wrong of us to fudge figures, if you like, and that turns sour. We don't want that. So we'd rather over.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And then obviously you mentioned. Oh, go on, sorry, Sarah.
I was going to say the only downside was of that lovely Eden Grove property, which are they're just gorgeous, was that I stuck everything into that. Then I wasn't able to get one of the Cornwall ones, which Andy got. For you.
I think we see it, and the reason we have been banging the drum is we see it as sort of. I mean, all investments got a risk, obviously, hasn't it? But we sort of seen it have the best of a lot of the different investments, and very few of the downsides on it. I mean, we sort of, with HMOs, for example, we still sold the old HMO and we'll still sell the odd one more as long as the numbers stack up. But it's like the options that this affords you are pretty good on the old let side in terms of.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I suppose if you were to compare, HMOs can be very, very lucrative, but they can also be incredibly time consuming, because generally within HMOs, certainly outside of London, you're not talking about young professionals, you're generally talking students. So while they might pay a lot, you'll have a lot of refurb costs in value, but the HMOs are too manual labour for me.
Yeah. Good ones are good, but there's too many that we
good ones are great. Yeah, but it would take too much work for me to understand it. And the residential property, you can only command a standard rate of, maybe if it's a 2-bed terrace in Stockport, it's going to generate maybe £600 a month.
Yeah.
Now, if you do things well with a furnished holiday let, you can be generating £100 a night potentially.
Yeah.
So there's, even if you only rent it out for half a year or less, you're still going to do a lot better than you would in a residential investment, even though it's the same amount of money tied up.
Yeah, and the one thing it does do as well is, and we know through the history of management, is that it's like, so when I go to in Sedbergh, when I go up there, I think I mentioned this on a webinar or some sort of podcast before, that I pre-COVID used to go up 7-8 times a year, and I always stop in the same cottage if I can. And what you find is the longer it goes on, the bigger your base becomes, because people, if they like it, don't change it. If they like the area.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Absolutely.
So you find that your bookings are going from year on year up already the year before.
Yeah.
And they book direct as well, aren't they?
Yeah.
When we first launch a project for bookings, they tend to come through the usual portals, your booking.com, which come with a little bit of fees. Then what we find in year 2 onwards, they come direct. So like Sir Paul and Sedbergh, I presume you wouldn't go through a portal. It's very much direct.
I just call it direct.
Yeah, exactly. So it's even better for the owner on it. So,
much better. And I think the Eden Grove one has a really good looking pub. Now, every time we've been up, it's been in lockdown. So hopefully next time we go, we'll get to check out the pub and make sure we can give your team a good write-up for the marketing brochure.
Great stuff. And the only other sort of final point was a bit on us, really. I know you mentioned on the packaging it up. Is there anything else that you sort of liked about us, our service, where maybe we're a bit different to others?
Do you know, everybody we've dealt with, without exception, at residential estates, well, maybe except for Paul, no, everybody without exception has been incredibly professional, incredibly proactive, and very, very communicative. You know, there's never been an issue with us having to chase for any information. You know, it's been, the only downside really has been sometimes the solicitors have been a bit of a challenge, but you guys have jumped in and helped us chase them. So no, really from the first connection, where I think Andy maybe emailed Chris about one of the properties, you know, on a Saturday afternoon, he was straight on the phone with them, and he has had no objection whatsoever to calls, text messages, questions, and you've really guided us through it. Brilliant. And you've also helped us whenever we had a bit of a sort of stutter of nerves and decided to pull a bit of a wobble, and we had a bit of a wobble, because whenever you go looking for something negative about anything, you can find it. Yeah. And it wasn't necessarily about, in fact, it wasn't about residential estates, but it was about the whole student properties where you're giving all of your money up front and not going to, you know, complete potentially until goodness knows when. And we had a bit of a wobble and decided to not invest as heavily as we've been going into that, which is great, because then we got the Cornwall one and Eden Grove instead. And, you know, you have, again, been incredibly supportive and worked with us. So I've only got good things to say.
Yeah, okay.
So yeah, thanks very much again, Sarah, for that. We really appreciate it on it.
No money exchange hands.
No, absolutely, all genuine. We've had a question in from Penelope, who I believe has purchased off us previously. Just to clarify on that, Penelope, it is very much still a hands-off investment. We were just mentioning on the furniture side, you may want to put your own bits of spin on certain bits. So the likes of Eden Grove, them sort of places we've recommended.
Yeah, when we're saying the more one puts in, it's the more thought they put into how they market it, not who markets it. It is absolutely hands-off. Yeah, if that's how you want it.
And it's the exciting part, like I mentioned previously, of putting your own little spin on stuff, doesn't it? Which on it, but still very much a hands-off investment property. But I believe Mike Johns, who is your sales consultant, is going to give you a call after this webinar to run through that with you.
We've got Jonathan back again after about an hour of being off. So thanks for your patience, Jonathan. We're nearly with you now. So and obviously we'll that'll be where we'll be answering the tax questions for those that have asked about that as well.
So let's get back to the questions, Paul.
Start off with an easy one.
To answer, how do you work out rates and occupancies?
We don't. It's done for us. In the past, things have moved on with software, etc. So we'd have to base it on looking around Airbnb, all this sort of thing, what's going on. But now, for us, we have things like Price Labs and dynamic pricing, which we will input what it is, where it is, and that will compare everything around it over a year to work out the rates and occupancies. Yeah,
rather than us just making it up. We still look at it, and we still always tell clients, like we mentioned with Sarah, actively look at it yourself. Use the likes of Booking.com, all those sort of portals, and see what could what come out of it. But it's very much software driven. So dynamic pricing is the big one, as you mentioned. Pricing Labs is an interesting one as well. That monitors price shooting up in certain areas. So let's say there's a boxing event or something in.
Same as what Raj said about the Ironman.
The Ironman thing. A good example. Let's use the Ironman thing. So when that's been announced and certain areas are jumping up hotels, Pricing Labs spots that, doesn't it? Yeah. And then puts the prices up of that particular landlord's property. So you're not having to constantly monitor it as a management company. A lot of it's done for you that way.
Occupancy rates are slightly different. With city centres, we will always, over a full year, when it's up and running, base it on 75% because we know that's what they've achieved for the last 12 or 15 years in the city centre. With touristic resorts, slightly different. It can vary, depending on where you are. But again, we usually look 65-75% for that because they are all season resorts now.
Of those software types, Raj, is there a different one that you use or that you're willing to?
Yeah, absolutely. There's Beyond Pricing, who we've had a trial with. They were pretty good. Ours comes through. Ours is linked up with Price Labs too. That's where our forecasting software gets its data from.
Yeah, I mean, we don't just want people thinking it's just a made-up number that goes on an Excel sheet, do we?
No, absolutely. And like you guys, we always do our kind of our practical test. The physical, the sort of bit old-fashioned, actually getting humans to look at it and do that comparison on Airbnb, Booking.com, as well as hotel rates.
Yeah.
And for us, I mean, it's not getting sales consultants to come up with those figures on it, because obviously sales consultants try and get the sale and everything like that, which is all part of it. But we very much work with the management company in the letting side because it's their responsibility and they put together figures on it.
Sort of reminds me of a question I got off a client the other day, and it was, and basically he'd done a Google Earth of the area. This is Southampton project. Said, I'm near a Premier Inn. I think it's a Premier Inn or Travel Lodge, and said, that's not good, is it? It's competition. And firstly, that's the exact opposite for us. That's gold dust. Because a Premier Inn or a Travel Lodge aren't going to put it in a place where it doesn't work.
Definitely.
And we're hands down, we're going to beat them.
We've got a similar one, haven't we, in Kendal, where there's a Travel Lodge right near it. Again, we don't see it as it's a problem. If there's a Travel Lodge there, there's good reason. These lot have done their huge research on it. So, yeah, maybe something to watch out when you're looking at properties. It doesn't have to be through us, but whoever you're looking to purchase through, don't be put off by competition like that. It's a good sign on it. So, a question come through. Are the short-term let properties mortgageable for international investors as well?
They can be, Melanie. Again,
we've seen plenty, haven't we, that have been.
And I think Melanie's one of the clients on my database. I mean, what I will do is I will drop you an email with a couple of options and you can speak to me. It all depends where your circumstances, personal circumstances, and what options are available to you. So I will drop you an email with a couple of brokers you can speak to and they'll deal with you directly.
Yeah, absolutely. But the market's definitely getting better, isn't it, on the mortgage 100%. Front on it? It was relatively fresh, wasn't it, previously, where it's much more newer now. Which, leads on to the next question. Can I mortgage these types of properties?
Yes.
Yes, you can. And as I say, it is getting easier. Originally, it was new, wasn't it, to lenders? They were a little bit hesitant on it.
This is on the furnished holiday let side. So you do have two mortgages ultimately, and I hope you're not saying anything wrong. You've got furnished holiday let where stuff like Cornwall, Eden Grove, very much you want to be going down that route. And then your city centres. I think it's fair to say, Raj, that 99% of everything that you see on Airbnb and Booking.com will be on a buy-to-let mortgage, I would have thought.
I would have thought so.
Yeah, and it's just a different management.
And that's for people to decide on it. People will always just get a normal buy-to-let mortgage and let it out on a holiday let. That's their choice. But the good thing now is, as you mentioned, there are furnished holiday let mortgages.
You chose a furnished holiday let mortgage over a buy-to-let, didn't you?
Yeah. And the rates are a little bit higher than a normal buy-to-let, but that gap is definitely narrowing now. There's more coming on. And there are tax benefits, Jonathan, on that anyway, where you can offset those interest rates, can't you, on that against it?
Yeah, exactly. We'll come to that a bit later on. That's one of the main advantages of the FHL over a regular residential let.
Yeah, and also when you do, it's again like any market competition. Once during COVID, obviously they were based in because no one was going to occupy a furnished holiday let. But as more lenders come on, rates go down because they've got to compete against each other. So what you see now compared to 6 months, will be different. But on the flip side of that, if you think, right, okay, I'm going to wait 6 months for a better interest rate, then trust me, the demand for these will be higher, so your property price will be higher.
Yeah.
That's how it generally works, so it's a good time to get in.
And Bikram's mentioned there, what is the highest LTV, best mortgage rates? I don't want to sound like I'm still on the fence, but it really does vary on different
circumstances, situation, yeah.
What I will say, we've seen plenty go through at 75% loan to value, sometimes even higher, haven't we, on the odd ones?
I'm always a little bit hesitant to talk about it because there's people who, based on Bikram's particular situation, but it's certainly very competitive.
Yeah.
If you're talking 10-15% now, you know, I think that's gone for everything now, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, but if you're looking at 25, then if you're in a decent situation,
yeah, you do it the opposite way around. I've noticed, to be honest. I say 70%.
Right,
but it does vary. I mean, certainly the 65% we see a lot of, don't we?
Yeah. You know, and the more you put down, the better. What I would say is, if you're an investor and you've got properties already, then you're going to be in a pretty good position. Now, obviously, if it's your first time investment, or like Manly, you're overseas, your options are going to be more limited. That's just a fact of life right now, you know, and at some point you've got to start somewhere. And as your footprint grows, your options will get better.
Yeah, absolutely. And a little thank you for Capital. That's a kind message there, that you're in the process of buying in Eden Grove through Michael Johns, and you're appreciative of the team. And a good mention for Danielle and Emma as well in our team. So no, I really appreciate that.
I actually just remembered I need to go back to a question very quickly about sites. And what they're forecasting like, which I meant to do on the rates and occupancies. We generally find them not too bad, generally quite conservative, and on the furnished hold to let side, you'll usually find they always quote for 30 weeks. The reason they quote for 30 weeks is because, as Jonathan will explain, that's what you need to have it let available for a furnished hold to let. They certainly don't go overboard. We generally find on our pricing, they are slightly conservative, and they will give you options, but I can understand why they do that. So I certainly won't let it put you off.
No, they're volume, aren't there? A lot of areas on it. Yeah. So, but we will get in the likes of Sykes as well, won't we? To look at that. So we did it with the Eden Grove one, didn't we, in the Lakes?
And with some properties, a mortgage lender will want someone like Sykes to have an appraisal on it, because Sykes are obviously seen as one of the four runners off the market as well. So they think if Sykes are behind it, then we're happy with it.
We've sent Paul undercover sometimes to speak to the likes of Sykes to get their view on what they would value nightly rates.
Better not give me alias on here, just in case.
That's the name that you use. Yeah. But it works. So this is another question. It was something that someone wrote in, wasn't it, when we put it out to people of asking of, will you get your reservation fee back if I can't get a mortgage?
And it's a question we asked. Now, ultimately, a reservation fee is when you are ready to commit to buying a property. So all your questions should be answered. If you, as I went back to earlier, if you are, we always do a lot of due diligence and speak to mortgage brokers whether the property is going to be mortgageable or not. We sell cash investments, and we will highlight it as a cash investment. If you are an investor and got properties, or your own property, or A+1, you're probably going to be okay. But if you're in a position where you are worried about getting a mortgage, and speak to a broker before you put a reservation fee down.
Yeah, and we will do it like you mentioned there, when we're launching a project for us. That's one of the big things we look at. We'll speak to a mortgage broker before you've even seen the property and get some figures, estimated rates, loan to value we're looking at. We can't say it's definitely going to be that if it's off plan and it's a few months off completion, but we can certainly give accurate at that point of time. And it's not in anyone's interest to take reservation fees or anything like that.
I think just on a slightly more sort of abrupt note, there is also a difference between when someone says, if I don't get a mortgage, there's a difference between getting a mortgage and a mortgage you don't like. Unfortunately, and again, that's why you do the research beforehand. You don't want to find out after if it's not something that you think is going to work for you. Find out before and be more comfortable when you reserve. That's what we do, and we'll give you the details of brokers who will do that. We're not here to try and.
Yeah. That sounded like a baby crying then. I don't know if that's Raj or Jonathan side. So yeah, moving on.
I think Jonathan has moved on.
We're going to need.
I'm still there, guys. Don't worry.
It's been a long 15 minutes without you there.
So tax benefits. Now you're a tax specialist, so there's no better person. I do want to add as well that. Sorry, Mike. I do want to add that with Jonathan, he's very kindly offered anyone who wants a free consultation after this webinar. He's quite happy to give. We will be giving out his details and a brochure, and you're quite happy to speak to someone about their personal situation, aren't you, Jonathan?
No problems. Yeah, that's just something we've been working on. We've been working together for quite some months now.
Yeah.
And we'll point out as well, we get educated, don't we, by the likes of Jonathan and Raj and all other types of people, I think, for us to learn. So we can give advice to an extent to investors, but for the detailed side, we'll always put you in touch with the experts. We're not tax experts.
We'll often
know the overview, don't we?
We'll often get asked questions we actually know the answers to. but we are not in a position to give those answers. Unfortunately, we want to try and do everything right, and that's why, as a company that deals with passive investors who want hands-on, we've got every single option covered of what you need, from furniture to tax to brokers to management, you name it. We can deal with it for you. No, you have to deal with it, but we look after that situation for you.
Absolutely. So over to you, Jonathan.
Hi, and it's been a great evening. Interesting, very, very interesting meeting you guys and talking about this topic. It's a little niche of mine that I've been getting into. I'm Jonathan Levy, founder of AccountsPro, an accountancy firm offering consultancy and account services right from the bottom up, from personal tax returns, VAT return, bookkeeping, payroll, all the way up to company accounts, setting up companies, tax advice, business plans, cash flows, anything that you might need. Apologies for getting to the end of the evening. I'm assuming everyone's a bit tired, so I'm hopefully not going to confuse and overcomplicate things with too much accountancy jargon. But please feel free to ask any questions if you want to find out a bit more, or if something's not clear. So I'm just going to talk very as briefly as I can to give you an overview of what we're talking about here tonight. The interesting part of an FHL is obviously to do with the tax advantages and why people are going over to them. So we're going to talk about why holiday lets, overview of the rules, mortgages and holiday lets, and then we're going to get to the big question of company versus personal ownership, which is often the question everyone wants to know the answer to. I've given the introduction to who AccountsPro is. So obviously, if anyone's looking to set up a company or have assistance with their bookkeeping, record keeping, and anything to do with managing the business side, happy to discuss that after the session with anyone that wants to find out a bit more about that. Just to mention something that was mentioned earlier about the concept of an FHL. So HMRC have recognised the concept of FHL as a trading business since 1984. So this is something that really does have quite a lot of history. An FHL is a trading business as opposed to an investment business. So when you buy a buy-to-let that's not a furnished holiday let, it's seen differently from an HMRC perspective. And an FHL is considered to be a bread and butter business for all intents and purposes, although obviously you're buying it for investment purposes, but the way it's run, the way it's treated for tax, means that it has certain advantages that a regular business would take advantage of, as opposed to residential property that has not as beneficial tax treatment. So one of the main reasons people get into FHL as opposed to residential let is the idea that the mortgage interest that you pay on the property for the purchase of the property, whether it's a residential let, it's no longer fully allowable as a cost against the profit. But for a furnished holiday let, the mortgage interest is an allowable expense. So it's going to reduce your profit and it will mean you're paying less tax overall. So that's really one of the key elements of an FHL. And that doesn't matter whether you're a company or an individual. Both company owned and individual owned will take advantage of the fact that it's a trading business, and will be able to offset those costs of the mortgage. So that's a very big factor when it comes to tax savings on a furnished holiday let. It's a good investment for tax planning purposes because the income you get, the profit from an FHL, is considered to be earned income, so you can use it to contribute to your personal pension. And the other thing to think about is that when you're finishing with the investment, when you want to exit the business, when you sell the business and you're taxed as a capital gain on the property for the value that the property has gone up over time, you're actually able to take advantage of a special relief for businesses, which used to be called the entrepreneur's relief. It's now called the business assets disposal relief, which basically lets you take the money from the company on exit at 10% capital gains tax rates, which is unbelievably low. That's, I would say, the three main points as to why FHL. Now, a furnished holiday let, HMRC, as I mentioned, set this up in 1984. In 2012, they actually clamped down a bit on FHLs and they made it a bit stricter for you to qualify as an FHL. The tax advantage, sorry, Penelope, thanks for your question. the tax advantage will apply regardless of who's running it, as long as you're the owner. That's the key element of it. The management side of it is just a cost of running the business. And Patrick, there's an issue of planning issues on switching. So I did mention before that there are circumstances where switching between a furnished holiday let and a regular residential let would be tax advantageous, but we can talk in more detail about that afterwards.
I think coming back to that with Patrick there as well, Jonathan, and in the general terms of the question, which, you know, if you do want to speak tomorrow, then Patrick, we can go through that.
Yeah. Coming back to the rules, so this is quite important, and obviously working with residential estates, they're going to make sure that you're compliant. I mean, that's just, you know, you have to be compliant, otherwise HMRC can come back to you and say, well, this property, you've said it was an FHL, it wasn't. So there's a few main rules I'm going to say here. It's a bit more detailed than this, but just to get an overview, it has to be run as a business. So you want to make a profit. It has to be a commercial business. The second element is the availability and occupancy of the holiday let. So there's 3 conditions to do with occupancy. 1, it needs to be available for at least 210 days, 30 weeks of the year, which is what you guys mentioned. It has to be less than 155 days to any one individual. And it actually has to physically be rented out for 105 days of the 210 days that it's available. And very last but not least, it needs to be furnished. In other words, the holiday home needs to be fitted out to qualify as a furnished holiday let. People need to be able to eat, sleep, drink, you know, and use it in the way that it's been intended. Minesh will talk about the capital allowances in a minute, but yes, the furnished holiday let will qualify for capital allowances. And that's, again, another big advantage of using a furnished holiday let, because a business, as you know, can claim capital allowances on plant, equipment, furniture and fixtures. And we'll get to that into the next slide. So what expenses can you offset? Well, as an FHL, as a business, it means you can claim the expenses of the business as a condition that the expenses are, number 1, commercial only. So any private expenses related to use of property, if you do end up using the property as a holiday home yourself, the private element wouldn't be allowed, but any commercial expenses are allowed. They need to be non-capital expenses only, such as utility bills, refuse, interest on mortgage loans, advertising or letting fees, any products you buy for the property, maintenance costs, cleaning costs, capital items. So coming to the capital allowances questions of Minesh, yes, capital allowances can be claimed. Furniture, equipment, fixtures, including a new kitchen, all of those things would be claimed by the capital allowances. Just going to move locations for a second, if you just give me 1 second.
I suppose, Jonathan, that makes even more sense to put a little bit more effort into the property that you furnish as well, because a lot of it can be claimed.
Exactly, it's all tax deductible. So one of the big advantages of a furnished holiday let is that it is a business for all intents and purposes. I'm going to move on to the next part now, which is about mortgages. So there's been quite a few questions about loan to value and the type of rates you can get. So obviously here I'm not a mortgage advisor, but what I would point out, it's quite important to take into consideration, is if you own the company if you own the property via personal or company, it's going to make a difference with the availability of mortgages, what types of mortgages, what types of rates you're going to be able to get. So it's one of the considerations where you need to keep in mind and discuss with the broker. I'm going to be talking in a moment about the differences between owning it personally and owning it in a company, but there's definitely something to consider from a mortgage perspective. And then the other element is on the mortgage cost, just to bear in mind, it's the interest element of the mortgage that is fully allowable in a furnished holiday let. So that's a massive consideration when it comes to the tax savings on an FHL versus the residential property.
Jonathan, can that be historical? If someone has got now a furnished holiday let or a short-term let property and they haven't been doing this, can they go back retrospectively or not?
Well, if the property would have been treated as a regular residential investment in their tax return or in their company, within the company, it would have been allowed fully already. If they were owning it personally, then it would only be up until the time that it stopped being a residential investment, and from the FHL onwards. So it wouldn't be retroactive, no.
Right, okay.
Moving on to the big question of the night, and again, I think, you know, there's a lot to be said about this. It's not such a simple question, and I think it's worth looking at each individual's personal tax situation and circumstances to get a good feel for it. But I'll just go over the main points here. Company ownership is very, very popular, and often people are jumping into it without necessarily considering the impact of it. It can be very tax advantageous to use a company, and in any business, whether it's an FHL, whether it's any undertaking that you're thinking of doing, there's always the question of, should I incorporate? The reason is to incorporate is that the corporation tax rate is relatively low. It's 19%. There was talk in the budget just now of it going up to 25%, but that's based upon, you know, going over a certain limit on turnover. Now, when a company is taxed 19%, what happens to the money in the company? The money stays in the company because the company is separate to you as the owner. In order to get the money out of the company, you've got three options. One, take a salary, which would be taxed under PAYE. Number two, you could vote a dividend, which we'll come to in a minute. Number three, you can close the business and then pay capital gains tax on the business based upon how much the property value's gone up within that business. So those are the three things you need to consider. I'm going to jump to the next slide very briefly, just to give you a sense of what exactly happens, because sometimes people are throwing around rates and it's not very clear what they're talking about. So you've got the basic rate of tax, everyone pays 20%. You get £12,500 free, so £12,500 free, and then the next £37,500 at 20%. Then between that and 150,000, it's 40%, and above that, it's 45%. I'm just going to go to this slide here just to give people a very, very brief overview. So your taxation is a bit like a bucket that gets filled up. So you may have your income from your job under PAYE, your normal salary, and that's kind of your other income at the bottom of each of these graphs here, each of these charts. And then the next slither of income is £2,000 worth of dividend income, which is 0%. You can earn £2,000 worth of dividends without paying any tax. That's just standard across the board. Now, if you're in the middle band, you're a basic rate taxpayer, then any dividends that you get from this company are going to be taxed at 7.5%. So it's important to remember it's 19% tax from the company. On top of the 19% tax of the company, you're going to pay 7.5% personal tax. Now, if you're a higher rate taxpayer or basic rate taxpayer, you'll notice on the right-hand side, the last three columns have a rate of 32.5%. And that's because once you've got income above £50,000 personally, you pay 32.5% dividend tax. So remember, you paid 19% in the company, plus you'd be paying 32.5% if you were to take out all the money from the company as a dividend. So one of the considerations when owning it in the company is, number one, do you need to keep the money? Do you need the money to come out of the company? And if you do, you know, you need to be aware of what your personal tax situation is and how much tax you're going to pay. If you're able to keep the money in the company, then you don't necessarily need to take anything out, or you don't need to take a lot out of it. Then leaving in the company can be great for tax planning, because down the line, like I said at the beginning, you can take advantage of this 10% capital gains tax rate on the shares that you own in the company. The other two things to come to consideration are ownership. So if you own a property personally, only up to 5 people can own one property maximum. A company, through the shares of the company, gives you the option of owning the company amongst as many people as you want. So if you're looking at family planning down the line, opening up to family members, a company gives you much more flexibility. I'll just finish off with this, is that understanding the company is going to cost you more money in accountancy. So, you know, I'm not trying to get myself any more money than is needed, but having a company is a big responsibility. It's something that needs bookkeeping and annual accounts and annual compliance statement with Companies House. There's a lot involved, and the costs of that need to be reasonable in comparison to the savings that you plan to make in the future using the company structure. All of that needs to be looked at on an individual level, and I'm happy to discuss with anyone further after this, anything they're interested in, want to find out a bit more about.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jonathan. I mean, what I would reiterate is we could probably talk about tax for an hour, what you need to cover. So anyone who is interested in their own situation or finding out more before investing, where they are with it, please do reach out to Jonathan. Details are on there, and he's got a link to a questionnaire, so he's got some details about you before we speak to you, and that consultation will be free. Yeah,
and I'm glad Peter's obviously mentioned there, really good explanation, so a compliment there for you, Jonathan, on it. We've got a great brochure, well, haven't we, that Jonathan did.
And that's been in the chat session there that people would have seen.
People can download on that, or we can send across. So, thanks again, Jonathan, really appreciate it.
It's one of those things where you get your ducks in a row with it, find out what you're doing. I mean, as Jonathan said, the amount of people that come to say, I'm buying through a company, and I know I've put a few people through to you, Jonathan, where they found out it's actually buying through a personal into than buying through a company, because it's just seen as this golden goose.
There's just no one size fits all, is there? That's the thing, and that's why it's worth having that chat with the likes of Jonathan. If
you get it right now, it'll be right all the way through.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think that's it.
About it, yeah. So obviously you've asked any questions there, but any other questions from anyone else? Now is your time to jump up. Feel free to ask us if we've missed anything. We've got probably a couple of minutes left. Feel free to jump up. If not, we do thank you for watching, and you're welcome to book in a consultation call as well, where you can speak to myself, Paul, or one of the sales consultants, and talk you through everything in even more detail. And we really try and understand, again, what you're trying to achieve, because everyone's different. Everyone's got different goals. There's not a one size fits all. So our first point of call is listen to you. What do you need from it, and then we can advise from there. And then it's up to you.
And we have tried for a long time now to be different from other agencies, and like everyone, there's rough and there's tough times and there's great times, but we do believe in what we sell, the partners that we have, and the procedures that we go through to try and make sure everyone's there, from buying something to the after sale side to ultimately the profit of your property.
Yeah, it's covering everything. Furniture providers, all sorts, isn't it? We're trying to keep it as hands off as possible, which I know a lot of you prefer that out there. So
I think Megan is typing now about the details, but they'll all be going out to everyone. And there will also, obviously, I think there's reruns of this that will be sent out to everyone as well. So
there is, and thank you all for your feedback. Appreciate it, Nick, Peter, really kind comments on that. So
thank you, Raj and Jonathan, for your time. I know it's quite late where you are now, Jonathan.
It looks pretty dark where Raj is there. Saving on the bills, Raj.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very cost, Raj.
There we go. Well, exactly. Well, it's either frighteningly bright or deathly dark.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. And like I say, anyone, any questions, just get in touch with us directly, or you got the representatives, etc., and we can go from there.
Great stuff.
Great, thank you for having us.
Evening, everyone. Like I said, feel free to book consultation calls. We'll send everything across. But thanks very much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Have a good night.
Thanks a lot. Keep everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.